Welcome, David Gauke. Very kind of you to join us this week on what is a busy day, because you're been announcing a rather massive U-turn in government policy. There comes a time, doesn't there, when you've been in government, where you have to unpick some of the things you did. An uncomfortable day, rethinking whether management of offenders on probation should be in the state's hands or private hands.
I think this is something that we've been looking at for some time. There was a big reform that was done in 2014, came into effect in 2015, called Transforming Rehabilitation. It was motivated, I think very sensibly, by a sense that we needed to have more innovation within the probation system, that we needed to make greater use of the private sector and the voluntary sector, that we should try to do things in a slightly different way, and also that we should extend probation to cover 40,000 or so offenders who have been in short custodial sentences. Now, some of the reforms, or some of the consequences of those reforms, have worked pretty well. When you look at the work that the new community rehabilitation companies have done on unpaid work, some of the accredited programs, that's gone pretty well. But we have faced difficulties for a number of quite complex reasons with offender management. And the conclusion that I've reached is that if we want to have a sustainable, successful, dynamic, innovative probation system, the cornerstone has to be a unified model, that we bring back that element of offender management that had been privatised, that we put that within the National Probation Service. And so setting it out, it's a policy I think that's driven by the experience we've had, driven by the evidence, still ensures a significant role for the private sector and the voluntary sector in other aspects of probation, like these unpaid work schemes and accredited programs. And I think ensures that we get the right sectors doing the right things. And so, it's something I've been looking at for a long time, and I think it's right that we make this announcement.
But some people would say the evidence was there in the first place that this was not going to work. And the National Audit Office, they say it was rushed. I mean, that's bad government. Well, isn't it?
We've certainly looked at what the National Audit Office has said, the Chief Inspector of Probation, the Public Accounts Committee and the Justice Select Committee. Of course, we've looked at what they've had to say.
But they there was evidence beforehand, and that this thing was rushed and maybe even driven a bit by ideology, that you've got to have the market in, and your predecessor wasn't measured enough, maybe.
I think so. I mean, I think what I'd say in terms of that is that it was something like 2 years in gestation, this policy. I think looking back on it, you've always got this issue of wanting to ensure that the new policy is properly bedded in at the end of a parliament. And there is always a need to strike a balance between wanting to take in all the evidence, but also not being in a kind of yes minister, in due course at the appropriate juncture and the fullness of time type of world. Now, whether that balance was well struck in this case, there'll be a debate.
Probably not.
But
I mean,
but look, we've looked at the evidence and we're now putting in place a new model that I think is the best way forward.
You'll have seen this list of things that your predecessor, Chris Grayling's now been hauled over the coals for: legal aid cuts, prisoner book bans, court charging scheme, employment tribunal fees, Saudi training contract, prisoner tracking system, now this, probably quite a few others, giant Borstal that never got built. Does there ever come a point when a minister is judged just not to be up to the job?
Should there? I think a lot of those things are really unfair with Chris. He was there at a time where we were having to make some very difficult decisions in terms of the MOJ budget, which had been reduced very significantly, and he was the person who had to say, well, look, this is the budget we've got to make some hard choices, and he made some hard choices.
Can you think of a right call he made?
Well, I think in terms of trying to sort of look back and identify sort of particulars. There are vast numbers of decisions that as ministers we make all the time. He was there at the point at which the budget was very substantially reduced, and that inevitably creates problems and people who will come back and sort of say, well, you shouldn't have done this and you shouldn't have done that. But if we go back, for example, to transforming rehabilitation, the idea that every single aspect of this was a disaster is just wrong. I mean, we have the offending rate, the reoffending rate, is lower than it was in 2015. Those that do reoffend, to be completely clear and open with you, have reoffended more often.
Skyrocketed, that's what the NAO said.
But that was a trend that was apparent before these reforms. So there are sort of wider forces at play here. But have we got a private sector that, for example, is delivering on unpaid work, where there's been a lot of praise in the inspectorate of probation in terms of the work that CRCs have done there? Yeah, absolutely. So I think even looking at this particular area, the picture is much more mixed than perhaps the sort of simplistic caricature.
The other thing that's going on as we sit here is that the Prime Minister's, as we speak, just emerged from a meeting with the 1922 executive, and it would appear she has said she will meet with the 22 boss, Graham Brady, again after the second reading of the withdrawal bill. Do you think Theresa May really does have a strategy with a chance of success for getting the withdrawal agreement through Parliament?
I think she does have a chance for success, but I'm not going to, for a moment, say that it is simple or by any means guaranteed, because so far Parliament has been very resistant to support any kind of deal. And I mean, you're familiar with these arguments, but I think it's becoming increasingly clear that the choices for the country, the choices for the government, the choices for Parliament are narrowing. Parliament so far has been clear that it won't support leaving without a deal, and I think there are very good reasons for that. But it has also been very resistant to agree any particular deal. And if we are not going to support a deal, then we're left with a pretty stark choice between leaving without a deal end of October, or potentially not leaving at all because we revoke Article 50, or we say we throw it back to the British people and they make the decision. We, Parliament, can't do that. And I think that would be a big failure on the part of Parliament. So the hope, and there's no guarantee of success of this, the hope is that there is an increasing, once we've got the European parliamentary elections out of the way, which I suspect will not be a comfortable occasion either for my party or quite probably the Labour Party, that there will be a sense in Parliament that, come on, we've got to try to resolve this, and this is the way we can resolve it, by supporting the withdrawal agreement bill.
So is it your expectation that the second reading, which nobody's dared bring before because these meaningful votes were going so badly, nobody wanted to bring the legislation, that somehow, in the aftermath of the European Parliament elections, some Tory MPs, some of those rebels who've been holding out, will come in line, and maybe some Labour rebels will come over to you to help with the business, panicked perhaps by those results?
I think you asked, is that my expectation? Expectation might be putting it a bit strongly, but is it my hope, and is that a viable, reasonable hope? Is that there is a sense now of, do we really want to push this to the kind of revoke or no deal situation? And my sense is that that's not where most of Parliament wants to be. Is there a hope that if you follow the logic of that through, you go, well, you support the withdrawal agreement? Now that may well not happen.
You felt that was the logic all the way along, and some people don't seem to be, to your eyes, behaving logically.
Well, I mean, maybe there are people who want to not leave, or want to leave without a deal, and maybe that's a position. It's not for me to pry into their souls, but I do think that if you want us to leave, you want us to, if you like, move on from Brexit, or at least the first stage of Brexit, then you need to support the withdrawal agreement.
So you talk to colleagues all the time, you're a very sociable MP. It doesn't feel to me, does it to you, that those Tory people who've been rebelling against the deal, maybe even some of those who came over and supported the Prime Minister the last time it was tried out, that they're going to come over in even bigger numbers to the Prime Minister? In fact, it feels to me as if anything, the momentum is the other way. And some of those people who came over to the Prime Minister at the last attempt are actually firming up their opposition again. And that's definitely the flavour I'm getting wandering around House of Commons. Isn't that what you get?
Gary, I mean, it's perfectly possible. I'm not.
What's your sense? You do talk to
it. I do, and I'm not for a moment going to suggest that I think we can get all of the 34, if you like, who voted against last time round, and there may be some who are considering the way that they voted last time, and so on. I accept that, but we may be in a different environment after the European parliamentary elections. And as I say, I'm being very open. Is that I'm not saying this will definitely happen. I'm 100% confident that we'll be fine. I'm not, but I do think that it will be very clear to Parliament, and I think this particularly applies to those Labour MPs who privately, behind their hands saying, "Oh, it'd make life easier if only you could get your bill through, if only you could sort it out, but we're not going to vote for you because it will be difficult within the party." But who recognise, they don't want a second referendum, and they don't want to leave without a deal. And whether some of those will in the end say, that's where we're heading if we don't support this deal.
There seem to be two games in play here, though, or two strategies that are being articulated to MPs. One is that sometimes pro-Brexit Tory MPs are told, come on, just get through the second reading, we'll get to the other bits of the bill, and then you can have exactly what you want. So you could pass an amendment which effectively removes the backstop. Meanwhile, Number 10 is leaning over to Labour and saying, get through the second reading, and then we can put the customs union in, a formal customs union arrangement into the entire agreement. Which one of those is the strategy?
Well, I'm not thankfully involved in the whipping process of this. I mean, the reality is that Parliament, of course, will be able to amend things as we go through this process. But in truth, any kind of Brexit with a deal has to run through the withdrawal agreement. And if you don't deliver the withdrawal agreement, then whether it is, if you like, at the sort of softer end of Brexit or whether it is at the harder end of Brexit, you're not going to get anything. You're not going to get a Brexit other than a no-deal Brexit.
So what you're saying there is that the idea of bringing back what's called the Brady Amendment, the one that Brexiteers like, which takes the backstop out, allowing that to happen, buying in pro-Brexit Tory supporters with that kind of offer, that doesn't deliver the withdrawal agreement because it's not part of the withdrawal agreement. So that's for the birds. That's not the strategy.
Well, it doesn't deliver the withdrawal agreement.
It delivers a bill, but not the agreement.
Yes.
Maybe.
Yes.
So that's not the game. So why should a hardline Brexiteer like Ian Duncan Smith say support second reading? Because that's not the game. The game is not to allow him to construct his own perfect, semi-perfect from his point of view, a withdrawal agreement bill with a backstop taken out. Why should he support it?
Well, I think for the very reason that Ian supported the last meaningful vote, or however we described it, because the risk for someone like Ian is that if you don't support the withdrawal agreement, then you potentially don't get Brexit at all. And there is a distinct chance.
So Ian Duncan Smith has another way of looking at this. He thinks the second reading vote is an ideal opportunity to defeat the Prime Minister again and get a new Prime Minister and a new Tory leader who'll be more more of the same thinking as Ian Duncan Smith, who'll be happy to contemplate no deal and the rest of it. So I still don't understand what's in it for Ian Duncan Smith and people who think like him to back the second reading. This doesn't seem like a plan that's going anywhere.
Well, the problem with that route, and I don't know whether that's what Ian has in mind or not, but if those who are thinking down that route need to bear in mind that a change of leader doesn't change the parliamentary arithmetic. And there is still a majority in the House of Commons that wouldn't support leaving without a deal.
He thinks he's got an answer to that. So he and a lot of people like him who are hoping for a contest soon and someone like Boris Johnson to come in who thinks the same way as they do, they think. They think that that leader will be able, using royal prerogative powers, to simply come out of the European Union with no deal. Parliament won't be able to frustrate them. And it might well be, of course, that Europe won't want to offer an extension anyway at the end of October. And the other argument goes, you can't compel that Prime Minister to ask Europe for an extension. Have they got that wrong?
Well, I suppose what I would say, Gary, is I'm reminded of some of the debates that were around at the beginning of this year that essentially said there's nothing that Parliament can do to stop us leaving on the 29th of March. And a lot of people said with great confidence that, that's, if we haven't got a deal, then it will be no deal on the 29th of March. And obviously by the time we got to the 29th of March, that isn't what happened. That Parliament had found a means to assert itself. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert on parliamentary procedure, but I think in the circumstances when having gone through that process in January, February and March, when Parliament did step in, is that if some of my colleagues think, we just changed the leader and then off we go at the end of October, at the end, that we leave without a deal is from their perspective, it's just to be cautious here, because to do that in the teeth of parliamentary opposition may be very, very difficult indeed, and Parliament might find a way of stepping in.
The other thing that an awful lot of people are saying on the Brexit wing is actually what we've just been talking about, the strategy for the next few weeks, is simply a strategy for clinging on. It's not even a strategy. It's just about how does the Prime Minister weather next week, somehow send everybody away on a holiday the week after, somehow have distractions the week after that. Does it ever feel like that as you watch Downing Street at the moment, that this is sort of hand to mouth, hour to hour, day to day?
No, I don't think it is that. What it is and be very open about it, a very difficult situation for any government where there isn't a parliamentary majority up until now for the policy it wants to pursue, but there are parliamentary majorities against every possible route. And that's the huge difficulty that we faced, and we've faced it for some time. I think it's probably been pretty clear since July of last year, in a way, the fundamentally difficult position that we're in. And any government in these circumstances that's wanting to find, I think, a kind of pragmatic way through, which is, in my view, a perfectly good deal, but in any event, a deal that is achievable, is trying to find a way through this and persuade sufficient numbers to come over and support it. And we've not managed it up till now. Of course, one can't be confident that we will manage it in June, but I think it's right to keep trying, to keep pushing away and seeing if we can find a way through.
But after June, if this effort goes ahead, Steve Buckley, your cabinet colleague, was saying just yesterday to the Lords Committee, if it fails at second reading, that's it. That's the end of the Barnier deal, the Brexit divorce deal as negotiated. We'll have to move on to something else. Is that right?
Well, it's not very different from the point I was making earlier about the choices being really quite stark for us.
Stark that day, because we've been told on every day that there's been a vote that this really is the one, this is the crunch one. This one is your message.
Well, it may well be. It may well be.
That's as strong as we can put it.
It's as strong. Making predictions particularly about the future, is a dangerous thing to do in this process. But I think we are potentially in that stark position. There's consideration about whether there's some kind of indicative or binding votes that could be done in the House of Commons. That's one route, but there are certainly arguments one could run about the pros and cons of that route. I mean, I think people might try. There are other ways in which we can try to pull together a sustainable majority in favour of something.
Where's the thinking of number 10 on that at the moment?
Well, I think I think number 10 at the moment very much focused on the withdrawal agreement.
The second reading.
The second reading and seeing what they can do.
If you're starting a project like that, you must know whether you intend to move to indicative votes or not, and leave it up to MPs sort of bouncing around in sort of Brownian motion of atoms, whether you really are going to leave it to them to decide it or not.
Well, they must
know.
Focus on. I suspect there'll be further conversations around the cabinet table.
We just don't know really
on
at the
that.
moment.
Well, as I say, I think there'll be further conversations around the cabinet table in the event of the withdrawal agreement bill second reading not succeeding. But I do come back to this point that if you don't, if you're not prepared to support a deal or something which provides the basis for leaving without a deal, then the choices, Steve's right to say that the choices start to become very stark. Now, are there other things that we can do to try to pull together a sustainable majority if the withdrawal agreement bill comes through? Possibly, but possibly not.
Do you think that you can imagine, you've been saying how this painstakingly negotiated agreement is probably the only agreement there is. The court divorce deal, there could be future relationship add-ons, of course, but that's the core deal that is going to pass, or we move into revoke or no deal, potentially.
I think there's definitely a risk of that, and I think those who think that...
How would you vote in that vote?
Well, let's wait until we get there, if we get there. But let's put it this way: I do think that they're both very unattractive options for the country. One would do great damage to our economy, in my view. The other would do great damage to trust in our political system. So I think we should do everything we can to try to avoid being in that position. And I wouldn't, I think the idea of, I don't think Parliament can just simply say, that's it, we're revoking, there's no, we've decided that this is a bad idea, we're not doing it, we can't find a way through. I don't think we can do that. I don't think that's, where we will be. I think the chances are that would end up in some kind of democratic event of some description.
A referendum
or general election, yes, exactly. And as I say, I think there are real problems with that as well. So, I really don't want us to be in that position, but I think we should all be aware that that's where we're heading, that we're drifting in that direction if we don't find a way through this.
Do you have a suspicion that some of the more hardline Brexiteer candidates who are, along with others, showing a lot of ankle at the moment and keen on the leadership, that if they were to get elected, let's conjure a name, I'm sure he's too bashful to try for it, Boris Johnson, say, if he were to become leader of the party and Prime Minister, coaxed out of his shyness, do you rule out the idea that he might use that little window of excitement when you just come into office and the wind's in your sails, to maybe put himself behind the withdrawal agreement, the one he's been voting against most of the time, maybe give it one more push and see if he can do it under his leadership so that he can close that chapter and move on to other stuff. Do you completely rule that out?
I'm not a specialist in Boris studies, so I don't know quite what Prime Minister Johnson would do in such circumstances. But in my view, the case is clear that we should be getting behind a deal, and that's where I think we should be.
Do you think he's more likely, perhaps, to do what he says in his campaign, what we'd expect him to say in his campaign, which is push for a really hard deal with the EU, one they don't really like, probably one they reject, and then try to come out with no deal?
That may well be the case, but as I say, I think you probably better off asking him as to what would be his campaign. But I think that's probably what most people would expect him to say in a campaign. I think there are real risks down that route. I think risks for the country. I think risks for the Conservative Party.
Just let me stop you there. The risk for the Conservative Party, presumably, is that some people just walk out.
Well, I think
it's betrayed one of its central purposes.
I think there are dangers if the Conservative Party is no longer seeks to appeal to a broad range of views. I think we are at our most effective when we are a broad church, that there is a danger that Brexit has become such a divisive issue for the country that if the Conservative Party only sought to appeal to people, if you like, at one end of the debate, that we become narrower, that we lose our appeal in some parts of the country. We might gain appeal in other parts, but we would definitely lose appeal in some parts of the country, and that over a long period of time in particular, we would find our ability to build a coalition to have a stable majority in the House of Commons very, very hard to achieve indeed. Particularly if we were to find ourselves in a position where we were unpopular with younger people, if we were unpopular in those parts of the country that, if you like, have got growing populations that will make a larger part of the electoral map in the years to come, and particularly if we end up pursuing a policy that causes significant economic harm, and people will debate about that, but most forecasters, most economic forecasters, most business organisations think that leaving without a deal would cause significant economic harm, then I think the Conservative Party would become narrower, less credible, and less likely to succeed, not just in the short term, but over a long period of time.
Would you contribute to the narrowing, potentially, by leaving?
I'm a Conservative. I've always been a Conservative. I want to fight for a Conservative Party that is broad, that covers a range of views. I certainly don't even consider myself to be at the end or the edges of the Conservative Party. I think I'm a mainstream Conservative, but I am very keen to ensure that the future of the Conservative Party is one that is not defined by one issue, is not cutting itself off from a significant proportion of the electorate, that is trying to have as broad appeal as possible. And we could find ourselves, to be very candid with you, we could find ourselves in the next few months going down a route where we fail on all those tests, so that we come narrower. That
certain candidates look like they could take the party in that direction.
It's possible, and I think a lot of these individuals who may well stand have got actually incredibly broad appeal, and but if they want to run campaigns, so it's not so much about the individuals, it's about the campaigns.
Type of hardline campaign that Boris Johnson or Dominic Raab
might do. I mean, I know Boris and Dominic pretty well. I like both of them.
You think they're neither, right?
And I don't think either of them are extreme figures by any means. But I'm not looking to sort of personalise this, but one could see a campaign run for where the Conservative Party goes that is then pursued in a particular way that takes the country in a direction and associates the Conservative Party with a direction that I think would narrow our appeal.
So the danger is that certain candidates might wave at the associations, pander to some of the more pro-Brexit, maybe hardline Brexit as it might be called, instincts of some in the associations, and might take the party in a direction which would be a disaster.
Well, I think there is this is a speech I did a week or so ago, there is a case that one should look at seriously about whether the Conservative Party should follow the direction of some other centre-right parties internationally and become a more populist party, define ourselves perhaps by a particular sort of set of values that may have appeal to some people in some parts of the country, but would also lose us support from others who've traditionally voted Conservative and some parts of the country that have traditionally voted Conservative. And I think we need to be careful not to do that. I think we do need to be, if you like, a one nation party that seeks that appeal. Now, actually, of all the major significant potential candidates, I think all of them, I would hope and expect, would want to have that.
But you have a worry that some of them will pander and make gestures towards, as it were, the sort of Brexit Party end of the market, what used to be the UKIP end of the market, and that would harm the party.
Well, I think there are, if you like, imaginable campaigns that could be run and platforms
They may be being run under our noses right now.
that would take us in the wrong direction, which would be a significant issue, most importantly for the country, but if I'm looking at it from my party's point of view, take us in a direction that would be a choice, if you like, for a generation. And that would be a choice that would make it very hard for us to succeed in cities, potentially some of the, I think the home counties and the Oxford to Cambridge corridor and so on, places which would look at that, where a lot of the public would go, actually this isn't for us. And I think we have to remember it's only 4 years ago that we won a majority. It was a surprise majority where we were able to attract a good range of support, and we attracted a lot of people who previously voted Liberal Democrat. We'd attracted people who previously voted Labour. We did well with black and minority ethnic groups, at least by the standards of the Conservative Party. We did pretty well with young people. Could have done better, but we did reasonably well with young people. It's not that long ago that we had that coalition of support. And I think we need to bear that in mind in thinking about the future direction of the party, that we've got to win over and win, for me, if you like, from a sort of one nation perspective.
Quickly ask a couple of questions, if I may. You talked about feeling that you're not on the fringes of the Conservative Party, you feel you're mainstream Conservative
Very much
Party. Is it quite clear that all the activists in your own constituency agree with that? There's been suggestions that move to deselect you, some people feeling that when you spoke out against no deal, that was unacceptable.
Well, I mean, in my own constituency is that it's been reported that there are 50 names calling for a petition for a special general meeting. I think that was declared on the leave.eu website about a month ago. That, as far as I'm aware, that petition, that letter has not been submitted to my association, so I don't know whether that's true or not, but if they've got 50 names, they're shy of sharing it with the association. Clearly there are members of my association, some of whom have joined very recently, but some of whom aren't, who aren't happy with the position that I've taken. But when I spoke at my annual general meeting, I said, I'm not going to argue a case I don't believe in. I met with some of those who were dissatisfied, and they said, well, if you were to say, no deal would be fine, it'll be all right, then we'll leave this all alone, and you won't hear any more about this. And I said, but I think no deal would be bad for the country, so I can't do that.
So you're not safe yet?
No, well, I mean, we shall see. Most of the members that I have spoken to in the last month or so have been very supportive, even those who fundamentally disagree with my position. But we'll see if there's if anything comes of it. But I've clearly got to argue the case for the country as I see it, and I can't sort of shy away from that, even though it may upset some of my members.
I just wanted to ask you finally about a moment in the cabinet on Tuesday. Prime Minister's supposed to have got a bit frustrated about how too many people see politics as binary and that sort of thing. But there was also supposed to be a moment when she looked around the table and tried to remind people about collective responsibility and tick them off, perhaps, for freelancing, speaking out of turn, not always holding to the message as directed from number 10. Do you think there was anyone in that room she didn't have her eyes on at that moment?
Well, I'm not going to talk about what happens within the cabinet. But I mean, on the big issue of the day, and we spent quite a lot of time talking about this, which was Brexit, and in particular what we want to do, every single member of the cabinet is wanting to get that deal through. We all come from, we come from different perspectives, and there are people who voted Leave and people who voted Remain, and people who worry more about no deal than others, and people who are more opposed to a softer Brexit than others. But everybody wants to honour the referendum in a way that protects jobs and livelihoods. So on that big fundamental issue, the Cabinet wants the deal to succeed. Whether we can do that, I don't know. But we all want the deal to succeed.
One big happy family.
At least on that issue.
All singing Kumbaya, no doubt.
Of course.
Thank you very much indeed, David Gauke, for sparing time on a busy day.
Thank you.